And now we present to you Thac0 with Advantage.
Welcome to Thac0 with Advantage. We're two friends that have been playing D&D a long time. While we both love lots of other RPGs, D&D has regeneration and we forgot to use fire.
Hi, I'm Ange, and I have been gaming for so long. I started with 1st edition, and I haven't stopped yet, and I've been writing for Gnome Stew for a little over a decade now. I also run the Gnomecast, the Stews podcast.
And sometimes I'm on there too.
Yeah.
I'm Jared. One night, after swearing to avenge my fellow nerds, I was pondering what I should do to start my campaign of revenge, and a D&D basic set window flew through the window. And I said, I shall become a gamer. You can find various things that I've written on gnomestew.com and whatdoiknowjr.com.
After we look at the games we're running in our campaign journals, we'll be talking about bringing out the good china at all levels, especially lower levels. Then we're going to have some recommendations for D&D related content for you to check out in our downtime research segment.
Now stand by for station identification. This is WDND the Role Player. Now we're going to McElroy McKinney and the Bardic College.
This is McElroy McKinney.
This is Mac McKinney, and you're joining the morning game. The AD&D First Edition Manual of the Planes had a section on alternate prime material planes to measure how different one world was from another that a player character might encounter. What do you think of that, Wolfman? Yeah, it's a little unnecessary if you ask me, especially since there were 3 scores that defined a reality. A physical factor, a magical factor, and a temporal factor. What do you need all that stuff for? For fun, Wolfman! These defined how much say physics had on a world, how much magic there is, and if another world resembled the world that the PCs were from, or is wildly different. The word multiverse isn't used, but rather polyverse. I take it to mean that there's a universe out there where every podcast is part of the Polygamers Podcast Network? We are, Wolfman, and we're not even from the universe this podcast is airing in.
And that's all from this week's Bardic College. Hey, producer, did you hear some weird static in the broadcast? I could have sworn I heard someone call me Mac.
Let me just finish up this campaign journal.
Oh man, I can't remember what I last talked about because not only did I miss the previous episode, a big con happened between episodes and I'm totally all over the place. So this is going to be a little bit of a big update as I cover a bunch of things I've done since the last time I talked to you. Now, while I tend to say we have D&D at home in relation to traditional fantasy games at conventions, I did still sign up to play Daggerheart at Origins.
Yay!
It was an introduction to the game from Darrington Press, organized through Double Exposure, a group that handles that type of thing for various game companies. The GM that myself and my buddy got for the table of our game had the full setup. He had laminated character sheets, dice trays for each character with the correct dice for each one, full terrain setup with minis for each character. It was super cool. The funny thing though, the scenario was the exact same one that Chris ran for me, Jared, Josh from Gnome Stew, and Sean Merwin last year. The GM started describing it. I'm like, okay. I'm fine with playing dumb and going along with whatever the group wanted to do. And it was a simple enough scenario that there's a lot that each GM is going to bring into it to give it its own flair. So it wasn't anything that was like no major spoilers. I'm not metagaming to break the game or anything like that. It was more just like, I know kind of what's happening here. It was still a lot of fun. I would very much like to play more Daggerheart. Unfortunately, I am not in a position to run it myself right now. So as much as I keep staring at the box set on my shelf, wanting to play, I cannot be the one to step up and run it. In my old Margrave game, they had made it back to Zobek, and I was trying to give them a single session of downtime while they figured out what to do with Lila. It turned into 2 sessions since I last talked about my campaign here. In the prior session, they kept actually forgetting that they had Lila with them, and I was getting a little frustrated that they weren't being more proactive about trying to find a new home for the kid. They kept coming with ideas that were pretty cool, but then not acting on any of them or proposing them to her. They even said they expected her to stay in Lavoca when they passed through, but they never actually roleplayed trying to get her to stay there with any of that set up. It was bad enough that after that prior session on the way to Origins, Zartath's player said to me, "You got to get rid of the kid." And I'm like, "No, you need to figure out something to do with the kid. This is not on me. This is on you guys.
This is your responsibility."
Like, this is not the GM going to hand wave it. You guys have a 12-year-old, technically 62-year-old, 12-year-old that's hanging out with you that you need to find a home for her. You need to tell me what you're doing. I'm not just going to hand wave and make this go away. You guys solve it. They spent most of that prior session returning the flowers that they found for Darlia Donningbrook at the alchemist at the Collegium. They also tried to sell her the ageless honey, but she was a bit too honest to try and scam them, so she sent them to a merchant I made up on the spot named Barston Gallon, who deals in rare alchemist ingredients and all that. On their way to a meeting with him, they ended up getting ambushed by a bunch of Red Cloaks, a criminal faction in Zobek who had tracked the stolen cloak that Malvern stole in their previous downtime segment. They ambushed them in the middle of the streets on their way to visit Barston Gallon. It was a pretty fun fight, with Malvern continually trying to proclaim his innocence. Now, when we played most recently, they finally took finding Lila a home suitable for a 12-year-old seriously. Grish and Malvern decided to spend their downtime taking her to their family farm and introducing her to the village matriarch, a halfling grandma that I really need to come up with a name for. They chose to do the farmhand downtime activity, and they failed miserably. Both rolled ones. Like, I think it was a 1, a 2, and a 12, and a 1, a 5, and a 15. Not nearly enough to succeed at the task, so they ended up having great fun describing the rest of the family and their villagers, making fun of them for having forgotten how to farm in just a few months. Lila did end up deciding to stay in the village. She was a little concerned about the fact that she has these new magic abilities that are appearing. But they discussed it with the matriarch, and she agreed that if Lila starts to feel like she needs more training or is having trouble controlling it, that she knows some people they can reach out to come help her, including the adventurers themselves.
I think I was lucky because the stars aligned, and I specifically had a player was literally playing Mama Bear, where she was invested in finding all of and there's so many orphans in the Markreef, finding these orphans and finding them homes and making sure that they were taken care of. So that was like a major character trait for her before we even started the game.
Oh, yeah. The rest of the group did various downtime activities as well. Most of them, went well. Zartath picked up a pseudo-dragon familiar that auditioned him as they were traveling through the woods. And he did a train your companion activity and basically gave Ovi the insight skill so that Zartath can, have the perception and Ovi can tell him if somebody's lying or not. Nevram tried to help the group by doing Know Thy Enemy and learning more about the Red Cloaks, but he also rolled poorly and only learned that people in the poor districts were scared. They got their next mission to go back into the forest when Jonah Duskmace, the brewer from the Riven Sky Brewery, showed up in town to basically get some supplies and kind of come to them and ask them a favor. She has a friend in another village, the village of Incot, who her last letter sounded a bit worrisome, so she'd like to send some dry goods and a cask of ale to them with the payment of a cask of ale to the party. The party never hesitated at accepting this mission. "Ooh, we like your ale. We'll do it." They set off the next morning, which was good because at that point Nevram was starting to realize his pact with the forest was going to start causing him a little bit of irritation if he stayed in the city for too long. We did get through a couple days of travel through the forest. They had an encounter with tree skinners, which are demonic dryad-like things.
I like those.
Yeah, they were pretty cool. I did kind of nerf them a little bit because I kind of forgot they have they only take half damage to non-magical weapons, and I'm like, these are I'm gonna play a little fast and loose here.
I threw those into Curse of Strahd to break up all of the blights because there's a whole thing where it's like twig blights, vine blights, all blights, and I was like, I need something else in here, so I threw those in there.
The other thing that happened with their traveling is I was having them make travel rolls. You know, they could tell me what skill they wanted to use to basically assist the party in traveling. Well, Mel and Grish continued their poor luck, and they rolled a pair of ones. So they ended up inadvertently wandering away from the group and getting stuck in a bog of quicksand, which required the other party members to come pull them out. It was ridiculous and kind of a lot of fun. We ended with them arriving at Lavoca to check on folks there before continuing on to Incot. I called the session early because they were like, yeah, maybe we can get some rumors of side quests here in Lavoca. And I'm like, I need some time to prep this. I think I know how to use this, but like, oh yeah, I don't have it ready. And like, I was still playing catch up post Origin. So I'm like, we're just going to end at 11 instead of trying to drag it out till midnight.
Yeah, sometimes you get a short but satisfying session in, and you don't want to keep pushing it and running out of gas.
Yeah, and Grish's player actually thanked me because she's like, I really want to go to bed. Okay. Now, in the City of Cowls game, which is the game I had to miss to go to Origins, the last time we played started off with the party split. Half had rushed off to the Gashkorum to stop the leader of the Sandrakes from trying to take over Rhee's newly formed Thunderdrakes clan, while the other half was kind of trailing along behind on a slower rate of passage. The GM kind of ran it interesting. He had us all roll initiative, and he would switch back and forth between the drama that was happening at the Gashkorum and a fight with some demons we ran across for the other party. And that was pretty interesting. At the Gashkorum, it was mostly Rhee challenging the other leader to a one-on-one duel. And it was a little touch or go in the beginning, but she took him out, and it was great. My character Dove was with the group that had some demons to deal with, so that was just a fun destroy everything type of event. After everything was all settled and the other group arrived, Arshan, the elderly Gorem, a spiritual leader of the tribe, suggested doing a ceremony to honor the fallen, since at the Gashkorum was basically the crypts that the tribes used for their honored dead. So she took some warriors with her to the crypts to prepare for the ceremony, but she didn't return when expected, so we were asked if we would go check, which required us to kind of break taboo and be outsiders going into the crypt. But it was a good thing we did, because we found out that the demons had found a way to release the soul of Lombok, the necromancer that was the source of all the problems in the previous campaign where I played Z, the Faceless Lady. He was like a floating skull or just this disembodied entity that was raising all the dead and causing all sorts of problems. We got to talk some sass back and forth to him. He had also raised the soul of the only previous Kakorum, which is the title Rhee is trying to claim by uniting all of the tribes. And the way he had awakened it, it was enraged and trying to fight us. When all was said and done, we defeated Lombok and sent his soul back to hell, and the soul of the Kakorum calmed enough to basically give Rhee his blessing, which was really nice. We get to play in person over the coming holiday weekend, which means we'll be dealing with the demon horde in person. So that should be fun. Summer fun, a swimming pool, a cookout, and D&D. What more could you want?
It's funny because as soon as you mentioned a villain from the last campaign, I immediately thought somehow Lombok has returned.
Yep.
In my Curse of Strahd game, we left off on a cliffhanger where they had tried to negotiate with Baba Lysaga, and it kind of was the wrong angle because the noblewoman Dhampir evoker that we have in the party thought that talking to a nursemaid that has dealt with nobility, that would be, you know, she would listen to nobility. I was like, it's kind of the opposite of that. Things kind of went wrong. They denied her offer of, you know, cursing one of them so that she died within a week if they didn't go to Castle Ravenloft. Negotiations broke down. Initiative was rolled. I was a little concerned because I have 6 players. it's not just a matter of they can handle things that are tougher than them. It's that they can if they all get to act. But if something that is beyond them focuses on one of them, they're dead. So it swings wildly. You know, it's like if all 6 of them just get bam, 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 they're probably going to punch way above their weight class. But also the individual things that these higher level CR things can do can still just, you know, rip some of them to shreds. I had already decided, since I am using the transformations from Ghostfire Gaming as the temptations from the Dark Powers, Baba Lysaga was going to sense that on them and decide it was more amusing to negotiate with them. So we played a round of combat, and the round of combat basically was to show them that Baba Lysaga could be very dangerous if they kept fighting. Because she, like, damaged 3 of them very badly, you know, right off the bat, but then she started realizing that the elf cleric wasn't reading as an elf anymore. She was seeming a little bit more fiendish. She thought it would be amusing to say, hey, if you get me something else to power my hut, I can give you back this gem that you are trying to recover for the Were-Ravens. Except she didn't say the second part because the PCs didn't admit that they're getting it for the Were-Ravens. But she sent them off. They go to this lake. They have to try and dredge this lake to find these stones that would collect power from moonlight, and that's what was going to replace the gemstone in Baba Lysaga's hut. Because Baba Lysaga's hut has to move, and it has to have a power source if it's going to move. That's how Babas work. At the lake, their main encounter were eels that were psychic. So every time they disturbed the eels, they heard their name reflected back at them, but everyone heard their own name. And so this whole thing became, they could have handled the eels. There were 3 of these eels. They were moderately dangerous. I love the fact that it just creeped them out enough that they were spending time like throwing illusions to the other side of the lake and trying to find like meat to throw at them to keep them away from the boat. It was great. But even though they were trying to find all these alternate ways to deal with them, I did still want it to feel like there's a chance that you're going to get into a fight. I'm not going to force it, but we still, we ran like them getting the boat from where they found the geode to the shore as a regular round, you know, normal round of combat, just to see, you know, I want to know exactly how much you can do in the 6-second round to see if you all make it back to shore before these eels come back and decide to eat you. And they did. But it was hilarious just watching them avoid this fight that they probably could have handled, because it was just creeping them out so much that there were eels that were saying their names to them psychically. Also, one of my players picked up on this, and I tried not to point this out too much. I completely made whispering eels because of shrieking eels from The Princess Bride. And I said, I can't be that obvious. I have to find something similar. So they have the geode. They brought it back to Baba Lysaga. Baba Lysaga gives them the gemstone, even though she kind of knows that they're going back to the Were-Ravens. In fact, she actually knows it's going back to the Were-Ravens, and she put a curse on it. So if the Were-Ravens come in contact with it, it's going to start like causing them to lose all of their feathers and age rapidly. And the PCs did manage to find out that there's a curse on the gem because they're not that naive. So now they're trying to figure out, how do we get this curse off the gem? We have the gem. Now how do we do this before we give it back to the Were-Ravens? In the meantime, as they were traveling to speak to the Were-Ravens, they found Van Richten's tower, which is like set up with all of these traps. Basically, Van Richten's tower is like a place in Barovia where you can take a long rest, because if something tries to come after you, it'll blow things up as they try and walk up the tower. Except that one of the traps will just collapse the entire tower. You don't want that one to go off. But they sneak into the tower and they find Esmeralda, who is the woman that is Van Richten's protege, who they've already run into before. And our cliffhanger was they finally get into this tower. They're all thinking, oh, we're in this tower. We can take a long rest in here. And Esmeralda is all beaten up and scarred. And she says, don't panic. I need some belladonna. And the PCs already know what that means. We also had my Midgard game. It was heavily court intrigue related this time. They were approached by one of the human merchant families that is supporting the Sultana in exile, and they basically ask them, hey, this human priestess is in trouble, and we would like you to intervene on her behalf with the Sultana in exile. And they find out that the kobolds that are at court, who work as spies and assassins, may have planted some evidence to make the priestess look worse than what she is. She was planning something, but it was actually to support the Empress, but they made her look like she was spying for the Dread Sultan. So the PCs talk to the Sultana and convince her to have a stay of execution until they have a chance to come back and really look at this evidence and see what's going on. The thing that's funny is it is hard for me to play the Sultana sometimes because she has to be likable, but she also ruled an empire. So there has to be a certain haughtiness, and sometimes I feel like I'm getting too friendly, and it's like, no. She's got to push back and make some distance here because, you know, she was in charge of a whole empire.
Yeah, but she's also, she knows she's in a position where she needs friends.
Yes, definitely.
She needs people to do stuff for her because
definitely,
while she was in charge of an empire, she is no longer in charge of an empire.
Correct. And she has to lean on rich humans to support her because she doesn't have armies of dragons and dragonborns anymore.
Yeah. And it's been long enough that I could see her learning that she, you know, a talented and powerful friend will go far if she maintains that positive relationship.
Yeah, and I don't want it to ever seem adversarial. I'm just like, I want her to have a little bit of haughtiness, though.
Yeah.
The PCs had like basically 3 different things that they could be doing. They accomplished the first one, finding the dragon slaying spear. So now, because it was closer, they decided to negotiate with the mercenary company that is sworn to Saint Othcatil the Twice Slain. I love Saint Othcatil. He is a thing from the Midgard setting by Kobold Press. He is a saint of Loki's religion who died a pointless death. Loki raised him, and he died a second pointless death after a while. The entire point of his sainthood is life is meaningless. Random stuff happens. So these mercenaries are obviously very much in that mindset. Like, we're going to live life to the fullest until we die because none of this matters. They make their way there. And right off the bat, they see some negotiations with some other potential employer that fell through because it seems like the head of these mercenaries is not a nice person and is not reasonable.
He was an ass.
He was. They made their way through the camp, so they got to kind of encounter all of the different officers. They also found out that, like, if all of the officers vote for a contract, it can override the leader's decision on whether they take a contract or not. And kind of, I was trying to make sure that they have a little bit of an idea of the different personalities of the different officers as they're walking in. Like, some of them are interesting and some of them might be more dangerous. And there was a lot that I had planned that could happen. I didn't expect all of it to happen. It was just, I was trying to plan for, if this officer is kind of primary, this is the kind of thing that could happen. So I didn't have like massive plans, but I did have some notes on each one and how things would unfold. They start talking to the actual head of the mercenaries, and the first thing they see him do is a servant comes up and he's not moving fast enough. So the head of the mercenaries grabs this guy by the back of the head and slams his forehead into the table. And I did something that I think was very important here. I made sure all of you knew that he didn't die. Because I feel like if he would have killed this guy in front of you, we would have been rolling initiative and there wouldn't even be any negotiation going on.
Yeah, no, that was important.
They realize this guy is terrible. They find out, like, he gets very upset because they were talking to his officers first, and he's thinking they're already trying to, you know, override him. And it becomes this basically a self-fulfilling prophecy, because once you're paranoid that all of your officers are trying to overthrow you, maybe they just do. The second in command had talked to Ivy, who is our Aasimar sorcerer divine soul, who is descended from Baldur, and basically was explaining how challenging for the leadership of these mercenaries works. If somebody challenges him and defeats him, if they are a member of the company, they could take over. If they are not a member of the company, they can name who is going to be the head of the company. They struck a bargain with the second in command, and Ivy decided to do the full-on, I am going to issue this challenge in the best way possible. So she pops the Aasimar wings, she's doing the full glowing thing, She gets bardic inspiration because our little former Ratatosk possum bard gets right up in this guy's face, and he's just, like giving him, what for. And it was like, it's very easily you can give, someone bardic inspiration by doing this. I was actually a tiny bit worried that he was going to issue the challenge because it really was Ivy's thing. And I was kind of glad that, it kind of turned into, him supporting Ivy doing this. But Ivy used advantage. Ivy rolled the bardic inspiration. Ivy used her sorceress talent to re-roll again. It wasn't that she rolled bad, it's that they were all kind of mediocre, so she wasn't sure how good she needed to roll. She finally settles on a 17. I knew I was going to have him make a wisdom save to see if he accepted this challenge. I love how this worked, because she stopped at 17, I rolled his wisdom save, pops up on the screen, 16. It's like the dice wanted the story to be told this way. Our Cyanite made very short work of him, but I think he made short work of him, but not in a way that made him look incompetent. It just made him look like, you guys are 12th level now.
Yeah.
You guys are ultra competent. It's not that he's incompetent.
Well, and I mean, because he is a fighter, he got to do attack, which is 3 attacks, and then do action surge and do 3 more attacks, all with doing extra side damage along the way.
The fact that the barbarian leader lasted 2 rounds is actually kind of impressive after he popped the the action surge there. But they overthrew the old leader. They instilled the second in command. Ivy kind of relaxed a little bit. There's this big celebration. Everybody's partying. Ratatosk is a Ratatosk again because he helped Ivy complete this part of her journey. So he is back on track with being basically her guardian angel, which is what he was assigned to do originally.
He's supposed to be her Jiminy Cricket.
Yeah.
He doesn't have enough wisdom to be her Jiminy Cricket.
And also he likes being a T-Rex sometimes.
Yeah. Or crab.
The crab was great. But when Ivy finally fell asleep and got her rest in her dream, she found out, no, the leader was not the chosen of Loki that she was sent here to oppose, but she did exactly what Baldur wanted, because now she is going to be in the proper position when the chosen reveals themselves. And again, actually, that session went a little short too, but it just felt like there's no point in pushing past this.
Yeah, no, it was a great session. Did everything we needed to do, wrapped up that part of the quests we needed to do.
It's also one of those things, I'm not saying anybody's wrong for this, but it is sometimes when people talk about how, we played a whole game of D&D and we never engaged the rules once. And I did, because the rules, I had it set up. I knew what disposition each person had. Even if you never rolled, I know this person is starting out wary of you, and this person is starting off being positively disposed towards you, and, this person is going to be a jerk. These things informed everything that you were doing, even though some of it didn't involve, making rolls.
Even if you have a session of D&D where you never engage with the mechanics, that's okay. It probably did a whole lot to advance the narrative and the storyline, and you'll have plenty of time to engage with the mechanics in the next session.
Yeah.
It's okay to have a session of D&D that's just some pretty cool, heavy role-playing.
Almost like having like a night of Shadowrun where you never do anything except make a plan that is going to go wrong in the first 5 minutes of the next session.
So at Origins, I played a session of Shadowrun, and it was run by my buddy, so I knew it wasn't going to suck. But there were a couple of moments where I was like starting to get fidgety, and I just looked at him and I'm like, if we don't get this show on the road, I'm going to Leroy Jenkins this shit. And he's like, understood. Because he's running Shadowrun. He wants to make sure we have all the information. Wants to make sure it like I need to stab something soon.
Welcome to the Dungeon Master's Workshop.
Today, based on a request from our patron TimeSpike, we are going to talk to you about how we can bring out the good china at all levels, especially and also at low level. To some extent, we may need to talk about what that means, because this is a term that Ange has used frequently. I know what she's talking about, but maybe we need to make sure everybody else knows what we're talking about. So, what are we talking about when we refer to the good china related to D&D?
So this is a concept that I kind of came across years ago when I first started blogging about role-playing games. The idea is that there are certain concepts in RPGs that are considered important and foundational experiences to those games, but with the way games are structured and the way they are often run, it is very rare that you get to some of those big moments. D&D isn't the only game guilty of this, but it is the one that I see it happen most often. Moving right on into the next part of this, the game is Dungeons and Dragons. And I played the game for nearly 20 years before I actually fought a dragon.
What is funny, I will give you a little bit of a glimpse of the process of us making the sausage that is this wonderful podcast. I had thrown dungeons in with other bits of China, and I realized dungeons are not rare in D&D. But when Anne said, people run into dungeons, especially at low levels, all the time in D&D, I suddenly remembered that most of my formative D&D was 2nd edition, and most of her formative D&D was 1st edition. 2nd edition did start with a lot more this adventure has all these event-based things and location-based things, and there might be a short dungeon at the end of this thing, whereas that is not necessarily the case with earlier versions of D&D.
So many dungeons. So many dungeons. I didn't fight a dragon in D&D until 4th edition.
That's wild.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's reasons for this that we'll get into, but it's basically all the shiny stuff that you hear about from high-level epic fantasy. What are some of those things, Jared?
Things like dragons and artifacts and other planes of existence and gods and fiends and angels and epic heroes that everyone knows about all over the place. And not just those things. When we're talking epic fantasy, we're not just talking gods exist in the campaign. We're talking gods manifest and have a bearing in your adventures. That sort of thing. It's
the stuff that kind of brings a lot of us to the table because we've read these books that have this stuff in it, and it sometimes just doesn't get to the table.
Yeah.
It's that holiday dinner. Your grandmother has this set of beautiful fine china that she only brings out for the big holidays.
Mm-hmm.
You never get to just have a really cool, nice dinner with the good china because, no, we need to save that. We need to save that for a special occasion. Why? Let's have a fancy dinner.
What's funny is talking about the transition from 1st edition, because this happened in 1st edition, but I feel like it led to a lot of the trends in 2nd edition. Dragonlance was literally a series of adventures that came about by them saying, we have so many adventures that have dungeons in them, but we don't have that many adventures that have dragons in them.
Yeah.
So now that we've kind of talked about what the good China is, what would make GMs hesitant to bring out the good China at low levels or too early in a campaign?
There is a sense that certain content in D&D and other RPGs needs to be earned. You can't face a dragon until you've played through all the levels before the one that makes it viable to take on a dragon. You don't want to give your players an artifact too early because they haven't earned it. And while that is one style to play, you don't have to play that way. Because let's be honest here. How many campaigns die before you ever get to the level where you're going to get any of that cool stuff? That was my experience. That's why I didn't face a dragon until 4th edition came out, because it was always, we're going to start at 1st level. Maybe if you're lucky, you started at 3rd level. And then we're going to build up to this epic fantasy. And the game dies before you get to 6th level.
Yeah.
If you're lucky. Let's just be honest here. There's a lot of campaigns that die on the vine, and the GM has all these big, grand ideas about how you're going to get to all this epic stuff. And as a result, you never get the epic stuff in the lower levels at the beginning to really make it feel like, yes, I'm playing D&D.
And I would argue, especially in earlier editions, holding back some of that content, knowing that everybody at the table wants that content and the DM wants that content, and we're all working towards the perfect time for all this to happen, if you don't have it happen and you have like months of play and it hasn't happened, that's actually sapping the energy you have to run the campaign. It almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because you're not having the epic things happen, so nobody feels like the campaign is epic, so it just kind of, sputters out.
A lot of lower level content, especially in earlier editions, could get kind of repetitive. If you didn't have a really skilled GM who could breathe a lot of life into that stuff and knew how to make the game feel like it was heading somewhere, it's like you could really lose steam.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, if you've ever wondered why the game has things like hobgoblins and orcs and regular goblins and kobolds, like all of these things that had a very similar niche, especially in earlier editions, it's literally just because they wanted to throw something similar at you at second level as they did at first level. And the way they did it was not saying that the goblin was more powerful. It was saying, oh, this is taller. It is a hobgoblin and has more hit points. I do think sometimes you don't want like an epic monster to lose its awe factor.
No.
So you don't want to like scale it down too much. You don't want a dragon to show up at third level and then just be, we could handle it.
Yeah, you don't want to bring an adult dragon up against some third level characters and have them be able to take it on.
And I'd also say this is a thing they talked about, redesigning the hatchlings so that there were, threats all, throughout all tiers of play in 2024. I am never, no matter what the stats are, going to feel satisfied fighting a baby dragon. I don't care. It is not an epic fight.
In a game that both Jared and I were in, I got really mad because the GM kept asking us if we wanted to kill these wormlings. And I'm like, I am not killing babies! When they grow up to be big bad monsters, they'll come back and deal with them. I'm not killing babies.
Yeah, so I mean, and so basically, yeah, you don't want to make these things lose their awe. Similarly, like, if you do want gods to have a big place in the game, but you have gods showing up when they're first level and saying, hey, I need you to go do this. Okay, but like, if we have an epic destiny, don't we need to feel it first? You're just showing up and telling me before I can barely lift a sword that I need to go do this thing, and it's kind of taking all the fun out of it.
There are ways to do that. We'll talk about that when we get to...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're going to get to it, but suffice to say, I understand that if you do these things wrong, it can take the wind out of the impact that you want these things to have. So why would you, however, want to bring the good china out at low levels? We did touch on this a little bit already.
Yeah, I think it is basically because we want the game to feel awesome and epic from the beginning. If these characters are meant to be pursuing this major quest or deal with these major forces in the game, you need to set the stage for it, and giving them that sense of epic purpose at lower levels, even if it's just hints, little dribs and drabs here and there that like just let them know that this stuff is coming, can really help to get the players invested.
Early on, we know a lot of people are inspired to play D&D based on media that they've seen, like reading novels or things like that. You don't wait until the 5th or 6th novel before Elric starts going to alternate realities. That happens almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
There is that feeling like you don't want the players to feel like they haven't earned it, quote unquote, but you also don't want it to take forever. Yeah.
In some ways, you go back to our episode about tiers of play. You could treat each tier as basically a book.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to give them some sort of climax towards the end of that tier to help carry them through to the next tier. And you can do that by using some aspects of these really cool epic facets of the game that get reserved for way late in the playstyle.
Mm-hmm. What have some modern editions of the game done to make it easier to bring these things out at lower level?
Well, one of the things you mentioned, like the 2024 edition probably took it a little too far by creating the baby dragons that you could take on. But starting in, at least as far as I'm aware, in 4th edition, they had different dragons at different level ranges.
Mm-hmm.
My first 4th edition playthrough, I think we were 2nd or 3rd level. We fought a dragon at the end of that dungeon.
Mm-hmm.
It was a young dragon,
Yeah, young doesn't make me feel nearly as bad as wormling.
Yeah. It was still, what's next step up from large? Huge? It was still huge.
Yeah.
You know, but it was still a dragon. It was young, and it was still a challenge to us. I remember having one of the coolest moments because I said to the GM, okay, it's a young white dragon. This room is full of ice. I'm playing a rogue. Can I do some really cool thing to slide underneath the dragon to come up on the other side so I'm in position to flank and backstab? And she's like, yeah, sure. Give me an athletics roll or give me an acrobatics roll. And I nailed it. So she just slid right across the floor under the dragon to the other side. So it was just so epic. We were 3rd level. It was awesome.
I may not fully agree with the wormling aspect of the 2024 rules, but they actually have done a lot in this new monster manual to provide for a lot of iconic monsters. Here is a lower level version of it. Here's a higher level version of it. Sometimes the lower CR version is the one that was the standard and they added a higher CR one. Sometimes the higher CR one was the standard and they added like a lower CR one, but they have filled those out a lot more.
Yeah, because it's the opposite of the situation is true too. Is there some of these iconic creatures that in older editions of the game, the bog standard version of it, the players just steamroll as they get to higher levels, and it kind of feels a little disappointing. We ran into that with a little bit in the City of Cowls campaign with the trio of succubuses. The first one we fought was really, really tough. We didn't fight her sisters until like 3 or 4 levels later. And so by that point, it's like they were tissue paper for us.
Yeah.
And so being able to have a slightly beefier version, it basically keeps the momentum of the story going for your players without breaking the quality of the game. And I know there's people out there who would argue with us. It's like, no, the CR is the CR. If the players will steamroll over it, they should steamroll over it. And it's like, yeah, but that's not always a cool story.
Right. One of my favorite additions in the 2024 rules is the Archhag, because there should be a high tier, hag that is up there to be a campaign villain.
Yeah.
There's no reason hags should not be that.
Very much so.
We're talking about the opposite end here. I think the main thing about making, modern D&D work a little bit better for this sort of thing in modern games is that you do need to make people feel like they've earned it. I know we kind of denigrated that a little bit, but earning it shouldn't be you have to play for 6 months and gain a level every half a year.
What modern games have kind of embraced is the idea that we are here to do something cool. And you don't have to play for years to get to the point of doing something cool.
Yeah.
It's the let's just jump to the monkey. Let's get to the cool stuff. And you can do it in such ways that the players feel like they've earned it, that it makes dramatic sense in the game without completely disregarding the mechanical journey to get there. If we were still playing the way we used to, you'd never get to the dragons.
Honestly, like, I'm running Curse of Strahd right now. You can throw vampire thralls at people when they're lower levels. Then you can throw vampire spawn that aren't, the full powered vampires. You work your way up to Strahd, but you can have vampires in the whole game. They can see them at every tier. Dungeons are one of the 2 things that are in the title of Dungeons & Dragons. What kind of iconic tropes are associated with dungeons? And is there anything, like, I know we didn't necessarily agree on this, but is there anything about dungeons themselves, not the existence of a dungeon, but the kind of things you run into in a dungeon that feels like good china to you? I can't help but throw this one out here.
Honestly, I'm like, dungeons are bog standard. Like dungeons are what the game is built on. I can't think of a game that I played that hasn't had a dungeon right in the beginning.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of like the big moments though. Like there are dungeons that are, this is a dungeon, and there are dungeons that are like, this is the personality of this dungeon. And like one of the things that I think of is like in the Tomb of Annihilation, they bring back the head with the Sphere of Annihilation in its mouth, where if you reach in, it's going to disintegrate part of your arm, which is absolutely not fair, but also is very iconic to the Tomb of Horrors.
I guess to a certain degree, I also have to acknowledge that I don't like mega dungeons. I find them boring. And while I'm not saying the Tomb of Annihilation is a mega dungeon, it is a campaign in modern D&D. It is a campaign designed around a dungeon.
Yes. I am also not actually a big fan. Like, I may sound like it because I brought this up. I'm not a huge fan of just playing a lot of dungeons. I like smaller, focused dungeons that tell a story with how you unfold and learn things about that dungeon.
3 sessions at most. 3 sessions at most before they get to go out, if they survive.
I had fun playing Princes of the Apocalypse, but the plot, well, basically the way Princes of the Apocalypse unfolds is you go to a dungeon and you find clues that there's another dungeon. And when you go to that dungeon, you find that it connects to an even bigger dungeon complex beneath that dungeon. That's the campaign. Spoilers.
Yeah, most of my experiences with large dungeons is the game peters out anyway. That's my experience. I'm sure there are people out there who love the big sprawling dungeons with intricate mysteries buried deep within them. And I think you can do that. I think you can do the mysteries in dungeons in lower level dungeons that leads to more stuff.
We're already talking about kind of doing a thing about dungeon ecology. I think it is worth kind of touching on some of the tropes. Like, not just that you're in a dungeon, but some things that are very D&D about dungeons. It used to be there was always a magic fountain that did something in the middle of a dungeon somewhere. So yeah, I think that's probably something else we can throw into that when we get to that dungeon ecology episode.
Bing!
If dragons are half the battle, then what are some tropes associated with dragons, and how can we make that relevant and meaningful at low level?
So I highly recommend taking a look at Dragon of Icespire Peak, which is an adventure in one of the 2015 starter sets that basically is this whole loosely connected adventures all based out of the town of Phandalin as they are dealing with the fact that this white dragon has appeared and is causing all sorts of problems. It's driven the orcs out of their home that they'd been using, which causes problems in other places. It's raided a couple of farms. It's disrupted all of these things, and the players have to deal with this. This campaign only goes to 5th level, and it ends with them fighting the dragon. It is very nicely structured to basically have the players dealing with the problems of a dragon and then getting sightings of it. And, things that are going on, but not actually engaging with it until they're ready at 5th level.
I think it's difficult to pull off, but there is an encounter in the very first D&D 5e adventure in the first adventure of the Tyranny of Dragons thing, where basically there is an adult blue dragon, and you're still 1st level. They have you firing a ballista to defend this town, and as soon as the ballista actually hits the dragon, it leaves. This is beneath it. It's not so much that it's scared of you, it's just that this is beneath it and that hurt. So I'm out of here. And I kind of like that because it does have you engaging with the dragon right from the start, but also kind of reinforces we can't deal with this thing one-on-one if it just rushes us. But you also have the excuse that there's a whole battle going on. So it's not going to stop and just destroy the ballista because it's not just you and the dragon. It's you and all the people on the battlefield and the dragon. So you're not quite as exposed there either. But
yeah,
it's tricky trying to communicate that to the players. Like, I'm not going to throw a dragon at you, but I do want you to shoot at one.
That's one of those things in a video game, the players would be getting the prompts.
Yeah.
Like there'd be this big glowing light over the ballista that would basically draw their attention and lead them to it. That's sometimes hard to pull off.
Yes.
In a TTRPG and get them to do it without feeling like you're railroading them to the one solution.
Yeah. I would also say that if you want to see a good example of a dragon being a meaningful part of a story for low-level characters, read The Hobbit.
Yep.
That is literally a story about a dragon being important to the overall plot, and yet not having the PCs actually fight the dragon.
I love that conversation between Smaug and Bilbo.
Yeah.
It's such a great moment. The players have to be willing to engage with it on the right level. And you as a GM kind of need to be a little careful that, you don't go too hard with the dragon just being like, why am I bothering? I'm just going to sneeze on these things and make them go away.
Since we brought up Dragonlance actually does have an interesting way of bringing those dragons in even before you run into the first dragon in Thac0, which is you're traveling by villages that are like burned and wrecked and destroyed by the dragon armies. Like, you're seeing the effects of dragons coming back to the world, even if you're not directly facing dragons at the moment. Powerful items that mortals were never meant to wield are definitely a fantasy trope. Speaking of The Hobbit, that can be tricky at higher level. It can be really tricky at lower level. So how do you include artifacts meaningfully as plot elements right from the start?
I think there's a couple of ways you can do this, and I'm going to steal from the Ladies of Fazdale campaign that Tristan ran. He did both the powerful artifact that humans are never meant to wield and an artifact that the players get and can use.
Mm-hmm.
So we had, I can't remember what he called it. It was the orb. Like, it was the thing we got in our first adventure. We were 3rd level. And we went and we recovered this orb. We realized it was really, really super evil. And we didn't want to give it to the 6-fingered man that hired us to go get it. So we decided to keep it. And Nyx basically put it in a special box and put it in a little hole in reality to store it there. And that started the whole campaign as we were basically hunted for this artifact. And that's a really cool way to do it, because it's this artifact that if the players try and use it, it's going to take their soul. And you can very easily let them know if they keep trying to push and use it. If you keep going down this route, you're going to become an NPC.
Yeah.
That's usually enough to make a player pull back on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you can take this artifact, claim it as your own. You are now the big bad of the campaign, make a new character. The other artifact he put in the game was Ethne's Skeen. It was a weapon that my rogue used, and the whole concept behind the weapon was that it thrived on reckless behavior. The more reckless you were, the more powerful it was. And if it ever felt you were being too timid or too careful, it would leave you and just disappear.
Mm-hmm.
The way Tristan set up this artifact is that it grew as the character leveled.
Mm-hmm.
So you didn't have just unrivaled power right from the beginning. You had a really cool weapon, but as Z leveled, it became stronger with different powers and different abilities. And I think that's a really cool way to handle giving the players an artifact that they get to use without making it completely break your game.
Yeah.
We ended up having this really cool moment at the very end of the campaign where we were in Lombok's tower. We'd defeated him. The demons that were fighting over his soul showed up to claim it. The tower started crumbling, and Nyx and Ashar could fly. So they basically flew out. That left Z to try and figure out how to survive this collapsing tower. I'm like, can I make a roll to try and surf the sacrificial table down the building? And he's like, absolutely. I got a nat 20 on my acrobatics roll to surf the stone table out of this collapsing tower. Tristan said as soon as it landed and Z was on the ground on her feet, she hears this excellent voice in her head going, "That was amazing!" And the dagger disappeared.
I think there's actually also some tropes that you unfortunately see in a lot of Conan and Conan-related movies over the years. Not endorsing these as good movies, but there is like a recurring trope of like, there is an order of people that were supposed to be guarding this artifact, and then somebody came along and stole it. Not only is that a good low-level hook for the whole campaign to say we have to find out who stole it and what they're up to and what do they want to do with it, it's also a good background for one of your PCs, because they could have been one of the people of that order that survived it, being raided and taken from them.
Basically, I think there are a lot of ways you can introduce artifacts into a game very early that do not require giving your player a +3 sword of evisceration or whatever.
Yeah.
There are ways to give them artifacts that make the story even better without breaking your game.
And to use our previous examples, in The Hobbit, it looked like a ring of invisibility until Lord of the Rings. So it doesn't have to be as powerful as it will eventually be when you first introduce it. In Dragonlance, the whole story is about finding Dragonlances. Like, so that is important right from the start, because these are the things that could help you defeat dragons. So those are some more examples that are built into D&D or are tropes that we have been with all along from Middle-earth. So breaking on through to the other side, weird other worlds are a fantasy staple, but they are not necessarily easily accessed by low-level characters. How and why could you have adventurers explore these realms right from the start? We did have an episode on planar exploration, so if you want to listen to that, there is an episode on that, but let's touch on that.
Well, answer me this. What level did the Curse of Strahd game start at?
Oh, first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yes.
It's like the campaign is the alternate dimension. It is the alternate reality. 4th edition is really doesn't get the credit it deserves.
No.
4th edition brought in easier ways to access like the Feywild and the Shadowfell.
Yeah.
That gave opportunities for lower level characters to deal with these adjacent realities in ways that were not super dangerous, basically level appropriate for those players and characters.
Yeah, because the Shadowfell and the Feywild are sort of like the material plane, but with aspects of it turned up to 11.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not completely out of the realm of a person from the material plane to handle.
You could even do a whole campaign that's set in Sigil.
Yeah. The other thing that could be interesting is, because I love the game Hades, if you start off with all the PCs like coming back from having died, like that's their story. So they remember the underworld, they remember the afterlife, and they are brought back to do a thing. That is one way you can touch on that otherworldly element of things.
Yeah.
I do think one of the problems that we had in earlier editions of D&D is that because things got quantified, and like we were saying, it got quantified as, well, if you travel to another plane, that's a really powerful thing to do. So plane shift is going to be a 5th level spell. It loses some of the things that are actually in stories about going to other realms, which is that sometimes there's a weird forest, and if you go there under the full moon, you end up in the fairy realm. That's the kind of stuff you need more to introduce these at lower level.
I think in the early days of D&D, there were a lot of the old Grognard GMs would run campaigns for literal years. And so a lot of these things that were created, like traveling to different planes, elemental planes, whatever, deities, demons, all of this, they were kind of added to the game to support these long-running campaigns. Mm-hmm. But our generation, the dumb kids in the basement playing, we were lucky if we got to 5th level before the GM TPK'd us. So, while there were GMs out there who were running these epic years-long campaigns, the rest of us didn't get to see that stuff.
Again, it's that idea that how much do you really want to force people to earn something? Mm-hmm. It is sort of the idea that you're dangling the carrot on the stick, except that in earlier editions, the stick was a mile long, and you forget that there's a carrot at the end of it. When I was going to ask this question, I originally kind of had this broken out into fiends and celestials and introducing them to a game, and then gods and singular cosmic entities. I think we can probably throw all of that together. These high-level conceptual things that exist on other planes of existence, like things that are as much a force of existence as it is an actual being. How do you introduce those things into a lower-level campaign? Looking
at a lot of these, right out of the gate at 1st level, you can make a tiefling. That is a character that has ties to fiends.
Yeah.
You can make an Aasimar. This is a character that has ties to the Celestial. You could make a Genasi. This is a character that has ties to the elemental planes. You can make a cleric. They worship a god. It's the right out of the gate, these concepts should be in the game, even if the players aren't necessarily engaging with a deity right away or a fiend right away. It's like these are concepts that you as a GM can play with as the characters level and grow. Again, going back to the City of Cowls game, because it's really good, Anu is a tiefling. We have been playing with the concept of what a tiefling is, what it means to have her soul held by Asmodeus since the game started at 2nd level. I don't know why we started at 2nd level. But we did. We started at second level. It's really weird.
So the wizard could have his subclass? I don't know.
I don't know. We didn't have a wizard. Right out of the gate, we were dealing with all these things. When we were talking about dungeons, I was going to talk about the very first dungeon we went into in the City of Cowls campaign, which is a crypt under the old part of the city, which is where we found the burial place we found the Garifos tomb, which is where Anu's ancestors were buried. Anu's ancestors were basically the leaders of the Tiefling Empire.
Mm-hmm.
We have a game full of princesses, even though we didn't plan it. But right from the beginning, we've got all of this cool lore and stuff that's in the game about these epic level things that we are now getting to as 12th level characters.
It was actually downplayed in the 2024 rules, but there are a couple things in the 2014 rules that actually, it's right there hiding in plain sight, this connection to other things. There were variant tieflings that would show that you were descended from someone sworn to Asmodeus, and then another one that showed you how that was different than one that was descended from Mephistopheles. That's an interesting story. Like, how is this different? What is different about that path? Also, unfortunately, Aasimar kind of lost this bit of lore, but in Mordenkainen's, when they were actually in... trying to remember where they first showed up in 2014. However, when they first showed up, there is the point that you have a spiritual guide. They aren't necessarily going to tell you everything to do, but sometimes your angelic ancestor will show up and tell you things. Like, they aren't there all the time, but they're supposed to be part of your story.
We talked about how when you have a cleric or a character who is closely tied to a god or a religion, you don't want the god showing up at first level and saying, "Yo, dude, go do this thing." But you can start dropping little seeds about that god starting to notice that character. You can play this in whatever way you want. When I played the Tyranny of Dragons campaign, I played Zalus, a blue dragonborn cleric of Cord. And when I made this character, I didn't realize that Cord had a hate on for chromatic dragons. And so I was like, oh, that doesn't work. But rather than changing the character to be something that, would worship Cord, we decided that Cord basically took an interest in her early on because of her affinity for lightning, and basically tried punking her out and, getting her caught in the middle of a storm, kind of punked her. She has no idea God is doing this to her. She just knows she's really angry that the storm is messing with her on the journey she's taking. And after that, the cleric power started coming into being. And over time, she gets closer and closer to Cord, where we actually start having conversations once she's higher level. But those early levels, it's like Cord was still very much a presence in the game and this character's life. It just wasn't him, showing up and smacking me and saying, "Go do this." It was much more like hints and portents and little whispers of stuff.
It's really funny to me because as of the Avatar novels in second edition, this kind of went out the window, but if you read a lot of Ed Greenwood's original stuff about the realms, the gods didn't show up personally very often. But he's got whole sections on things about what does it look like when Mask manifests to a follower. And there's all these sort of they're obviously supernatural things, but it's not Mask showing up and doing a thing. It is this dagger bent before, you could touch somebody with it. Things like that were, and he actually spells this out for a lot of different gods. It's kind of worth looking at some of these older editions where they talk about, especially in the Forgotten Realms, how the different churches of these gods work, because they have some of those manifestations in there. And I really like those, so that you're not just having a god show up and tell somebody something, but it's also kind of feels like this symbol just showed up on my forehead, so that kind of means something.
I basically think if you have a character in a game you are running that is a cleric or somebody who has a strong tie to a deity, don't ignore it. And actually, this goes for warlocks too.
Yeah.
Don't ignore their patron.
Yeah.
You can. You don't have to do anything as a GM. That's all just the source of their powers. But if you want to do some cool stuff with it, have that entity's presence felt in the game.
it is one of these sadder things to me that I do see a lot of people play clerics because they want cleric spells and they don't really think about what their religion actually means to that character. And there are so many story beats you can get from that. Like, I loved playing my grave cleric because they worship Jurgle, and the whole reason that they were, looking after the elemental cults is because one of Jurgle's interests is apocalyptic prophecies. So I am going out and chronicling all the poor dead adventurers because that's one thing that I do, and the other thing is I am looking into this cult, and how do they believe the world's going to end? So all of that tied back into that, and also I did that before Baldur's Gate 3. Thank you very much. The other thing, though, I would say, which is on the opposite scale of what we were talking about when we were saying subtle, watch the 1980s version of Clash of the Titans. Because what's neat about that is the gods are constantly messing with Perseus, but it's not a thing where it's like, well, the gods keep showing up, of course I'm going to win. No, one god puts them in danger, the other god goes, wow, they really screwed you over, here, have this magic item. It is kind of this idea that the gods are competing over you to do things in your life, and you do get the feeling like Perseus probably isn't like super high level when this first starts. And I just love that idea that like this all kind of starts because, well, it all starts because Zeus
can't keep it in his pants.
Yeah.
Or I should say Zeus can't keep it in his toga.
Yeah. It all kind of starts though because Hera's like, he is too safe where he's at. I'm going to pick him up here in this model and set him over here, and that transports him to this part of the world, and he wakes up and goes, how the hell did I get here?
Of course, now I am picturing Russell Crowe as Zeus from Thor: Love and Thunder.
See, instead of the remake of Clash of the Titans that we got in the 2000s, I would much rather have that version of Clash of the Titans. Do we have any other thoughts on bringing out our good China that we haven't touched on? Big iconic things.
I think we've covered a lot of the major iconic things, but I would say take a look at the epic fantasy stories that you love and think about the things that you might want to bring in to that. The Chosen One storyline. Mind you, this can be dangerous because RPGs are an ephemeral thing, and if you lose a player that you made a chosen one, you're kind of screwed. But like that's a concept that you can bring in, and it doesn't necessarily have to give the character plot armor, but it does give the characters a destiny and a goal.
I know there are going to be people that push back on this, but Anakin being the chosen one didn't mean that he was going to be the hero of everybody. He completely screwed that up. Like, that could have gone one of two ways, and it went hard the wrong way.
I mean, there are arguments to be made that it wasn't the wrong way. It was the bad way for Anakin, but it did kind of bring things full circle for the Force.
But it is an instance where your chosen one doesn't necessarily have to be the hero that nothing bad happens to.
Yes.
Now let's join Ange and Jared for some downtime research, where they do the work so we don't have to.
Every episode, we're going to look for something related to D&D that we want to pass along to you, our listeners. It might be products, websites, videos, or podcasts, but it will always be something that we think will enhance your D&D experience. First, though, our Eldritch Invocation. We've got a Patreon now, so if you would like to help us do this show and provide some additional content for you, we would love it if you would decide to join. We've got our own Discord, and we'll be releasing additional supplementary material like the map Chris made for the Heroes of Havel's Way we're currently playing in, and all this other stuff. There's a lot of cool stuff there. Back to Patreon. We love you. Do the thing. So for me, I wanted to call out the Humble Bundle RPG Mega Bundle.
Holy crap.
Roll big or go home. I think it's 57 PDFs. And while it is a lot of things that are not necessarily fantasy, it still has RuneQuest, Warhammer Fantasy, Dragonbait, Root, Witcher, Simbroom. All of those are fantasy-based. Plus, it has Night's Black Agents, and Vaesen, and Savage Worlds, and Avatar Legends, and it so many things. So many things. $40 gets you all of that. It is so many games. Put them on your iPad or your tablet. Read them all. It's a lot of good gaming stuff. And it is everything from, big name games to little indie stuff.
And I think, just glancing at that when you shared this link with me, this is a great way if you have ever kind of wanted to look at some of these, but don't want to invest like $20 in a full PDF. Like, there is such a wide range of things in here. Like, if you've ever thought, I wonder what that Transformers RPG is like, hey, guess what?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is like, I have a lot of these PDFs already. I have all of the Masks PDFs. I have all of the Knights Black Agents PDFs. I have all of the Savage Worlds ones they have in there. You know, I have plenty of the others too, but there's so many other ones in there that I'm like, I'm going to do it. And there's also a portion of it that goes to charity. So the link will be in the show notes. It's worth checking out and, you know, satisfying the digital book goblin inside of you.
For my particular plug, there are probably more supplementary things on the DM's Guild talking about Curse of Strahd than just about any other adventure. Kind of makes sense because, you know, time after time when they poll people about their favorite 2014 era adventure, it's been Curse of Strahd. It has staying power. It's hard to kill Strahd. Strahd stays around a long time. So I've bought a lot of these. I like a lot of them. Some of them I have used to incorporate some ideas into Curse of Strahd. Not saying that Curse of Strahd is bad. It's just that it is very much a sandbox game that your players could wander into an area and kill themselves at third level very easily by going to the wrong place and pissing off the wrong person right off the bat. So it is kind of nice to have these things that even if you've read through the book, that kind of warn you, don't send them here first, send them here. In that vein, I found another resource that I had never seen before in this last week, and it is called Curse of Strahd Reloaded. It is a website. It isn't, you know, it's not a product or anything like that. You can just go to this website. They have links talking about the different parts of the adventure. They have call out boxes saying, this is how this NPC shows up in the adventure, but you may want to use them this way. Like, it is amazing, everything they have in there. They have stats for some of the NPCs that don't have stats. They have stats for some of the NPCs that kind of didn't have impressive stats to make them a little bit more dangerous. It is really neat, so we are going to have a link to that in our show notes so that people can take a look at that and maybe use that in your games. We are happily part of the Polygamers Podcast Network, helping you run and play your best games. We think you'll enjoy another Polygamers podcast like
The Heroes of Havel's Way. The Heroes of Havel's Way is an epic fantasy story about two young heroes, Odie and Aramon. These heroes have the potential to deal with a dire threat from an ancient time that is poised to return to the world. A Titan destroyer, Valhel Morris the Mountain Strangler, stirs. The fate of the barony of Kassakin may be in their hands. We play the game to find out. We invite you to join us on the journey.
Wow, those two sound really cool. We have used up all of our resources, so I think it's time for a long rest. I hope this adventure was rewarding for you. We hope that you'll go exploring with us when we start our next adventure.